Hello, guys, and welcome back to my podcast. This podcast is for those learning and studying English. I am confident you will be able to practice English conversation, listening, and practice speaking like a native. This may also help those preparing for any English exams. Even if you are a beginner English speaker, you are welcome. Let us learn English with podcast conversation. If you have been here before, welcome back. And if you are new, thank you so much for coming. So, last time I started my story time about my last tragic relationship and how I have been able to overcome it. If you missed the first part of the story, don't worry, you can go back and listen. Just click the link on your screen. But the summary is that I grew up in Florida and had an amazing childhood. I later moved to New York and went to college there, where I met Mark, the man with whom I thought I would have spent the rest of my life. When I met Mark's parents, it was clear I was not the woman they intended to wed their son. But Mark had my back, and we pressed ahead. So, a day after we graduated college, Mark asked me to meet him in the same park where we first met. We met at that same bridge, overlooking the pond. That day, the water in the pond was a deeper green. I think those in charge had done a very poor job keeping it clean over the years. But I also noticed more happy ducks in the pond that day. They were being fed by a handful of our friends. Everyone looked so eager and excited. I had no idea what was going on, but I was pleased to see everyone. I suddenly remembered my best friend checking my manicure the day before. I remember her saying, I had to ensure I always had a fresh manicure because I could never tell when something beautiful would happen to me. As my mind started to wander and question, Mark appeared at the bridge holding a bouquet of the most beautiful long-stemmed roses I had ever seen. Long-stemmed red roses were my favorite flowers, but Mark had always failed to get the right ones for me, on occasions like Valentine's Day or my birthdays. Today he came bearing the best kinds, those which were bright red. It felt like I was falling in love with Mark all over again. We embraced and he handed me the roses. Between the rich fragrance of the flowers and his perfume, the atmosphere was breathtaking. Our friends chuckled and indicated to him that it was the right time. He told me he loved me, and how much he had enjoyed our 2 years together. By this time I was still in awe, but no longer confused as to what was happening. Mark then fell on one knee and held my hand, placing the most gorgeous diamond ring on my finger and demanding, "Marry me." It was the happiest day of my life, the icing on the cake of what was an already glamorous relationship. But our wedding was not to be. In hindsight, there were some things I should have definitely questioned Mark about more. We had talked about marriage before, and he had always maintained that I would be the one he spends the rest of his life with. But whenever I queried about the specifics of our future, like where we would live, whether we would have children, and how many, he would get agitated. The question of where we would live was especially critical, because I was living in New York at the time and Mark was from Texas. He refused to give me all the details about some critical future plans. I would later find out that Mark was set to take up a significant job post at a tech company based in Texas. That was a scheme engineered by his father, who I also found out was hell-bent on preventing Mark from marrying me. Remember when I said, being with his family made me feel like I was in the presence of the royal family? Well, that is instructive, because they really operate like a monarch. His parents had apparently pre-selected a bride for Mark, long before I even met him. I found that out from Mark's cousin, who came to visit us one holiday. He knew the girl, and knew of his parents' intentions. But according to him, he was not going along with their plan. Well, that is what he told me. Seemingly frustrated with all my questions about our future and his inability or refusal to answer, Mark gave me this assurance. We would take a trip to Japan after graduation, enjoy our final weeks of freedom, then return to the US, start working and figure out our lives going forward, and then plan our wedding. We had decided on Japan because we thought the country was quite fascinating in name and nature. We had planned to hike Mount Fuji, visit Tokyo Disneyland, explore Okinawa, and enjoy all the delicious food Japan has to offer. But almost a week after we got engaged, and just 3 days before we were scheduled to leave for Japan, his parents caught us off guard, showing up at a restaurant one evening while we had dinner. They shouted at Mark for ignoring their calls and text messages and told him they had to travel all the way to New York to prevent him from making what they said was the biggest mistake of his life. We had to wrap up our dinner earlier than we had planned, and went back to our college dorm, where a shouting match between Mark and his father ensued. Mark had told me that it was only his parents' idea for him to marry the other young lady. He assured me, with that lovely smile, that he had insisted he wasn't going to marry her. He assured me, with more than his smile, that I was the only woman he loved. But I got the shock of my life when I found out that not only was Mark already engaged to the girl, a decision made even before he started college, but Mark, the young lady, and both their families were fully on board with the plan. It appears that I was just a placeholder until Mark returned home. His father also made it clear that the job in Texas would be filled by Mark, and very soon. When his parents calmed down and he finally got them to leave, like the liar he is, Mark tried to assure me once more that everything was just a big mix-up, and nothing would change between us. He promised me he didn't feel anything for the other woman, and that he was not going to marry her. But Mark couldn't explain why he had lied to me about the job in Texas. When I had found out about it from his cousin, Mark was adamant that it was not true. But the job was real, and he was to start in the next 5 days, even though we were scheduled to go on vacation in the next 3 days. I made it clear to Mark that I was not able to trust him because I wasn't sure what else he was lying to me about. And within the next few days, I would find out everything. Mark was lying to me. He had promised both his parents and the girl that he would marry her. I am still not sure what plans he genuinely had for me. I guess it was just a game for him. The ticket he had bought me to Japan was for a solo trip. There was no ticket for him, unlike what he had told me, and many of the other things he had told me were never true. So I was then faced with the decision of whether or not to go to Japan alone. I asked my best friend to accompany me, but it was too short notice, and she had made other plans. In a depressed state, and finding it difficult to make sense of my current reality, I decided I needed to take a long trip as far away as possible. I needed to make sense of my life and find myself after this turmoil. For the past 2 years, everything about me was intertwined with Mark. It is like I had lost sight of who I was as an individual, because nothing was about me anymore. It was all about us. This left me broken, confused, and desperate. I needed time to breathe, time to heal from the trauma, and the space to start over and thrive. So a day before I was scheduled to leave, when I saw an advertisement about forgetting all your worries and moving to the most beautiful place on earth, I got excited. When I opened the advertisement, I learned they were seeking English teachers to live and work in Japan. That was the first time all week I felt excited about anything, because after the fiasco with Mark, I felt lost and depressed. I thought about this opportunity for a few hours, and then I decided I would do it. My friends and family thought I was being ridiculous. They asked me how I would be able to manage being so far away. They encouraged me to postpone the trip and take some time to get over the heartbreak. But I thought this opportunity was the best way to get over that hurt. And after almost a year of living in Japan, I know that I made the right decision. Living in Japan, I have been able to learn so much, and I have had some great experiences. I still cry sometimes when I think about Mark, the hell he put me through, but I am happy for the life I have been able to create here in Japan. By the way, I had tried to cut contact with Mark, but he has made it very difficult. Up to this day, he is adamant that he has no intention to marry that girl. Sometimes, I get tempted to move back home and give him another chance. Do you think it would be a good idea to hear him out again, and perhaps give him a second chance? Please tell me in the comments. Honestly, I just don't see myself entering that tangled web again. I am happy right here, with a community of love and support. If you want me to share more about my relationship adventures, please let me know in the comments. I really don't want this video to be too long, so anything else that you desire to know, please ask me in the comments, and I promise I will answer. And speaking of answers, in my next podcast, I will be joined by an old friend, Duke, who will answer some of my questions. You don't want to miss that one, so please look out for that podcast, which should be released on Thursday. I can't wait to catch up with Duke. So that is it for today. Thank you for listening. It was fun to have this talk. I really appreciate your views and any feedback you have. Thank you very much. See you soon.